we're going to talk about the Rocket, Rick Woods. Rick Woods was the first United States Speedway champion in '68 at the Whiteman Stadium. He beat all those great riders in the first and only United States Speedway Championship at the Whiteman Stadium. Then they closed in '69. Then Harry Oxley and Jack Milne, they opened up the great Costa Mesa Speedway in 1969. And they did it really well. Rick Woods was one of the top dogs, along with Slide and Sonny Nutter and the Bass Brothers and Wild Bill, Cody. They dominated the scene at the early days. And the people start coming into Speedway at that time. And they had like 4,000 seats. And then they had to increase it to 4,500 seats, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. And there was just people coming to the Speedway all the time. Probably because there was no internet at the time. Also, the Speedway was exciting. It was something fun to do at Costa Mesa. And other tracks start popping up after the success of Costa Mesa. And Speedway just became a very big ordeal. Lots of young people from the beach area went to Speedway. And the Rocket, Rick Woods, was one of the superstars of the early days Speedway. He was really good and he competed. And in the '70s, he won 2 United States Speedway championships. So in total, Rick Woods, he won 3 United States Speedway championships, which was really great. Why? Because Mike Bass won 7 in the '70s. Steve Bass won 1, and Rick Woods won 2. So it was basically Bass and Woods dominated the '70s. And Mike Bass, he was really on fire. He took over the lead over Rick Woods. But in the early days, it was Rick Woods' turn to dominate. And he was sponsored by a very good Speedway mechanic named Ed Schaefer of Speedway Research. It was in Santa Ana, Costa Mesa, California, off of MacArthur and the 55 freeway. And I got a chance to go there one time when I was a new rider. And I knocked on the door, and Ed opened the door and said, "Who goes there?" It was like the Wizard of Oz, you know. And I told him, "I'm a young Speedway rider and I'd like to see a shop." And he said, "No, go away." And I said, "Please, Ed, I just want to look at your shop. I've never seen it before." So Ed is a good guy, and he said, "All right." And he let me walk through his shop, and it was like a surgical center. And all of Rick Woods' motorcycles were there. I think those were the days that they were running nitro. So of course, they had to rebuild those motorcycles quite often because the nitro fuel was very fast for those 2 valves. However, they burned the engines up fast too, probably the valves also. So they were constantly rebuilding those bikes after running the nitro fuel. But Ed's shop was beautiful, and I believe it was only Rick Woods' bikes there, and it was really gorgeous, and it was super nice. And Ed Schaefer, he definitely ran a clean outfit, and later on he passed away of a heart attack. He was such a calm guy. You know, you talk to Ed Schaefer, who was Rick Woods' sponsor, and Ed Schaefer was so calm, and he just had a real mild manner about him. It's like he hardly spoke 2 words, and he didn't like to talk. You could tell when somebody's not very talkative. And I'm talkative, but Ed Schaefer wasn't. And I was a little surprised that he had a heart attack and passed away a few years later, because it seemed like he didn't have any stress at all. But going back to Rick Woods, he just totally dominated the early days Speedway scene. And Larry Huffman really liked Rick Woods. And then Gene Woods was just a little guy. He was being interviewed by Larry Huffman on the intercom. I was at those races, and I'm like, Gene Woods is like my age, and you know, he's getting all this attention. And I talked to Gene Woods on an interview about that, and he said, well, you're not the brother of Rick Woods, are you? I said, no, I wasn't the brother. You were the brother of Rick Woods, Gene. So he got a lot of notoriety because of his name and his brother, which definitely helped his racing career. And Rick Woods was just a real good brother to Gene, and he was just a fantastic rider. Some people didn't like Rick Woods, but Rick Woods was kind of like billed as one of the heroes at Costa Mesa Speedway. So he wasn't really considered a villain, although some people did not like Rick Woods because he was feisty. And in order to be a United States Speedway champion, sometimes you have to be feisty, right? You have to be tough, and you have to stand up for yourself and really fight. So Rick Woods was definitely like that. And he just was steady. And I think one time when he was living in Huntington Beach, they called him the Huntington Beach Rocket. That's why they say the Rocket, Rick Woods, because he lived in Huntington Beach, California. And one time, I think it was, he was riding a street bike. I always rode a street bike, and I still do today. And Rick Woods was popping a wheelie in Huntington Beach. And while he's popping a wheelie, the front tire came off. And then Rick Woods landed the bike, and then of course he went down. But Rick Woods, he had a very successful speedway career, and he was just a fantastic three-time United States Speedway champion. He raced in the Team USA versus the world. He had several of those. And Rick Woods, he had the number 2. And so all of his life, he was number 1 or number 2, which was pretty cool. And he just was a cool cat. He was a nice guy. He didn't talk that much from what I saw. And about the only time I met Rick was at the Malibu Grand Prix. They had this go-kart like track next to the Angel Stadium my first year as a racer, and Rick Woods was there next to me in line, and he was tall. You know, Rick Woods was like 6'2", 6'3", tall, skinny guy, very handsome. And I looked at Rick, and he looked down at me and like, who are you? Because I was a first-year D3 rider at the time. And I said, hi Rick, how you doing? And he just kind of looked at me and said, like, okay, like, who are you? So he didn't really talk to me. So I know Rick Woods wasn't a very like outwardly talking to stranger type of people, but he was a gifted rider. And I remember as a little boy, like 12 years old, I used to always root for Rick Woods watching the Speedway. And Rick Woods, when he rode with a very smooth style. He was very elegant in his Speedway. He was fast and he was smooth like a machine. He was really, really good. And I was really amazed at Rick Woods' style, his ability to control a Speedway bike. It was really fantastic. And I kind of was an early day fan of Rick Woods. But then the Bass brothers start taking over, and Rick Woods couldn't beat them eventually. So it was kind of sad to see Rick Woods go down. And by the time I got to First Division, my first race in First Division was a handicap race against Rick Woods and Juicy Brucey Penhall. And I looked at the program and I said, like, this is not fair. You got my idol Rick Woods in there, and the guys I've been cheering for last year, Bruce Penhall, and now I got to race these guys. And I was kind of freaked out because I didn't realize I was going to race Rick Woods so fast. And I don't know exactly what happened to Rick Woods. During that race, I was a front yardage rider, and Bruce Penhall and Rick Woods were like at the 50. And Penhall finally caught me, and he passed me by a wheel length at the finish line. I bobbled at the last turn, turn 4, and Penhall got me. And I was so mad at myself because I had that race won, and I made one mistake, and Penhall took advantage of it. And in his style of passing at the last second, he did that. Penhall was a fabulous rider. And I don't know what happened to Rick Woods. I never saw him during that race. So I don't know exactly what place he placed or where he was at. All I know is Penhall was riding my tail and he wanted to win. Penhall, he hated to lose. You know, every race he just wanted to win. But to give Rick Woods credit, I talked to Gene Woods about that incident of racing his brother. And he said, well, Rick was getting old by the time I started. So, you know, he kind of was slowing down and, I don't know, maybe getting a little burned out at the Speedway. It was one of Rick Woods' last years. But when you're a new Speedway rider, you get kind of freaked out when you see these guys racing you. And I raced Wild Bill Cody many times. And I used to say, God, you're riding Wild Bill Cody. He's so good. And when I was like a 6-year-old boy, I went to the movie theater and I saw him in the Australian movie, Side Hacks. And he was a fabulous long track racer, Bill Cody. And I was racing Bill Cody on a long track. So I was like, this is weird. But you just have to forget stuff like that when you race these guys and go out to win, because winning is it's what it's all about. So anytime you're on a race, in a race, you want to beat that guy, even though they were your idol last year or 5 years ago. You want to beat them. And Rick Woods retired about the time I was getting into Speedway, so he was quite old as a Speedway rider. And he didn't really like motorcycles no more after he retired. And he moved like to Newport Beach, and he was building and repairing boats at the Newport Harbor. He had a boat business. I read in the paper he was repairing the boats and also cleaning the barnacles from underneath the boats. And he was quite the mechanic, Rick Woods. And he just was a fabulous person. And then as he got older, I think he developed some kind of cancer, and it was sad because Rick Woods started, his health started to go down. And they had a thing where, a charity thing where they were raising money for Rick Woods, his hospital bills and stuff. And then he passed away with a different kind of situation. I forgot what it was, but he passed away. And right before he passed away, he went to the Grand Industry Hills and he had his final ride on a Speedway bike with his brother Gene. And they were riding the Speedway bike, and Rick Woods was happy to be on the Speedway bike once again. He was on the back and Gene was riding the bike, and Gene was trying to pop some wheelies with his beloved brother on the back, which almost turned chaos, but it didn't happen. You know, Gene's a good rider, and it was just sad to see the passing of a legend so young, Rick Woods. And we will never forget the legend, the memories of the early days of Rick Woods as one of the great Speedway legends of all time in American Speedway. And Rick was just a fabulous rider. But it's kind of shocking that after his Speedway days, he never really rode a motorcycle again. He didn't like motorcycles, which I felt was quite fascinating, that Rick Woods loved motorcycles so much, and then he had nothing to do with them after his racing days. But some guys are like that, you know, they just want to race and then that's it. I like to ride motorcycles every day, so it's hard for me to relate to somebody never touching a motorcycle, because motorcycles are fabulous, whether it's a Speedway bike or other bikes. But Rick Woods, like I mentioned, will go down as one of the all-time great Speedway riders in the early day revival of modern day Speedway. And he was just a shining star and he was good, and he was very good. So good, he won the first United States Speedway Championship at the Whiteman Stadium in 1968 amongst really great riders. So Rick Woods had a fabulous and decorated speedway career. And we will never forget the great riding ability and the memory of the truly great rider, which was Rick the Rocket Woods.